You don't notice it at first. The tiredness comes quietly, like light leaving a room at dusk. Nothing dramatic, nothing you could point to and say, "This is the moment." Just a long day that never quite ends. You are the one people call when things wobble. Late night phone calls, voices lowered, problems passed across the line like heavy parcels. You listen, you nod, even when they can't see you. You explain, again and again. Not because you enjoy it, but because silence feels like abandonment. In the kitchen, the house finally still, you stand with a cup gone cold in your hands. The clock moves. You don't. Your body is here, but something in you has stepped back, leaning against the doorframe of itself. You replay conversations without meaning to. What you said. What you should have said. How you softened the truth so it wouldn't bruise anyone else. You have learned to speak carefully, to wrap your no in apologies, to make your limits sound reasonable, kind, justified, as if your right to rest requires a footnote. And there is a particular ache that comes with this. Not the ache of being unkind, but the ache of being endlessly available, of feeling useful while quietly disappearing, of being understood just enough to be asked again. You notice it most after the helping is done, when the door closes, when the call ends, when there is nothing left to fix and no one left to reassure. That is when the silence arrives, and it is not peaceful. It is hollow. You sit there and feel the weight you have been carrying settle into your shoulders. Not one burden, but many small ones, stacked carefully over years. Expectations you didn't agree to, roles you slipped into without noticing, explanations you kept offering so others wouldn't feel lost. It feels like holding a door open long after everyone has passed through. Your arm trembles, but you keep smiling, because letting go seems rude. Because you were taught that being good meant staying open, staying patient, staying clear. But the body remembers what the mind excuses. The fatigue in your bones, the heaviness behind your eyes, the quiet resentment you don't want to name. You begin to sense, without quite saying it aloud, that you have been carrying more than your share, that something in you is tired of proving, tired of clarifying, tired of being understood only on other people's terms. And in that recognition, there is no anger yet, just a deep, honest weariness. You sit there, hands slowly opening, and let yourself feel how heavy they've been holding. At some point, we begin to wonder why we do this, why the giving never seems to end, even when we are tired past words, why we offer help before it's asked for, why we stay alert to other people's needs while our own fade into background noise. You start to see that it isn't generosity alone. There is something quieter underneath it, something learned early and practiced faithfully. We tell ourselves we are being kind, and we are. But woven into that kindness is a small, persistent fear that if we stop, something will be lost. Affection, relevance, belonging. So we keep going. You notice it in small moments. The phone that doesn't ring back. You told yourself it was fine. Everyone is busy. But you checked it anyway, later than you meant to, hoping for a sign that you still mattered. Or the familiar phrase that comes so easily now. I'm fine. You say it with a smile that does most of the work. It keeps things moving. It reassures everyone else that nothing is required of them. And you mean it just enough to believe it for a moment. We become skilled at fixing what no one asked us to fix. A tone in someone's voice, a tension in a room, a problem that might arise if we don't step in first. It feels like care, but it is also control, an attempt to secure our place by being necessary. Somewhere along the way, we absorbed a quiet rule, that goodness means shrinking, that love is proven by inconvenience, that being needed is safer than being known. So we give before we are asked. We explain before we are questioned. We soften ourselves so others won't feel discomfort. And in doing so, we make an unspoken agreement with the world. I will carry this if you promise not to leave. The trouble is, no one ever signed that contract. And still, we honor it. There is guilt here too. The guilt of imagining rest while others struggle. The guilt of saying no when you could say yes. The guilt of choosing yourself and calling it selfish, because that word was always nearby. But if you look closely, without judgment, something begins to loosen. You see that this pattern did not come from malice or weakness. It came from a desire to stay connected, to stay welcome, to stay safe in the circle. And perhaps for a long time it worked. People leaned on you. You were thanked. You were relied upon. But reliance is not the same as love, and usefulness is a fragile place to rest your worth. As this becomes clearer, the guilt starts to thin out, not disappear, but soften. You begin to recognize the cost without turning it into a crime. You begin to see yourself not as failing at kindness, but as having misunderstood its price. We are not cruel for wanting to matter, but we suffer when we believe we must disappear to do so. And here is the quiet paradox that begins to surface. What you give to keep yourself included may be the very thing that keeps you unseen. There comes a moment when something shifts, not with noise, not with conflict, but with a quiet, unmistakable click, like a door you didn't know was closed finally opening. You begin to see the pattern whole, not just the giving, but the cost of it, not just the kindness, but what it has been asking of you in return. You notice how often your own needs are the first thing left outside the room, how quickly your hands move to help, even when they are already shaking, how the word later has followed your own life for years. This is not a moral failure. It is not that you cared too much. It is that care, without a boundary, slowly turns inward and consumes its source. A candle can light a room. It can light many rooms. But it cannot be passed endlessly from hand to hand and still remain whole. At some point, there is only smoke and a darkened wick. You feel the sadness of this recognition, the grief of realizing how much of yourself you have spent without noticing. Moments you were present in body but absent in spirit. Days shaped around other people's urgencies, while your own waited patiently and then quietly disappeared. And yet, there is relief here too, a strange loosening in the chest. Because what you are seeing is not an accusation, it is clarity. You begin to understand that virtue, stripped of limits, stops being virtuous. Generosity becomes depletion. Patience becomes silence against your own truth. Loyalty becomes staying in rooms where the air has grown thin. You have been holding doors open so long, you forgot what it feels like to sit down. You have kept rooms warm for others while standing in the cold yourself. And no one told you to do this. You simply learned that this was what love looked like. But love that requires your disappearance is not a higher love. It is an unfinished one. This realization does not make you hard. It does not turn you away from care. It simply restores proportion. It returns you to the center of your own life. You begin to sense that helping, when it costs you your wholeness, is no longer help. It is habit. It is fear dressed as virtue. It is the slow erosion of the one who gives. The room feels brighter now, not because anything has changed, but because you can finally see what has been happening all along. You breathe differently. The air moves more freely, and you hold this truth gently, without drama, without shame. Kindness that erases you is not kindness at all. There is a different way this begins, not with a speech, not with an explanation rehearsed in your head, but with a quiet decision you make while no one is watching. You stop pushing the door open. You begin to understand boundaries not as walls, but as thresholds, places where you pause and decide whether to step through, places where you feel the weight of your own body again, standing where you are. The phone rings, and you let it ring, not out of punishment, not out of indifference, but because you are listening to something closer than the sound of it. You notice how much strength there is in not responding immediately, how silence gathers energy instead of spending it, how not every call deserves an answer, and not every feeling needs a reply. This is not withdrawal in anger, it is withdrawal in clarity. You are no longer storming out of rooms, you are simply choosing not to enter. You see now that explanations were never really for others. They were for your own discomfort, a way of easing the tension of choosing yourself in a world that taught you to stay available. But something in you has changed. You are less interested in being understood, more interested in being intact. You close doors softly, not to make a point, but to preserve the quiet inside. You leave conversations unfinished. You allow misunderstandings to remain misunderstandings. This is what self-respect looks like when it matures. It doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade. It doesn't need witnesses. You begin to see absence differently, not as abandonment, but as a form of care. By stepping back, you give others space to stand on their own. By stepping away, you stop interfering with lessons that are not yours to teach. There is dignity in this restraint, in letting people have their reactions without managing them, in allowing disappointment to exist without rushing to soothe it. You are not closing your heart. You are placing it somewhere safer. The world does not collapse because you are quieter. In fact, something steadies. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders lower. Your attention returns to the room you are actually in. The house begins to sound different. A softer kind of silence. Not the hollow one from before, but a living quiet, air moving, fabric shifting, time passing without urgency. You sit, the phone face down, the door closed but unlocked. And for the first time in a long while, nothing is being asked of you. The curtains stir as the wind moves through the room. You begin to see it differently now. The distance, the quiet. Not as retreat, but as care taking a new shape. Think of yourself as a house at evening. Not a grand house, a lived-in one. Wood warmed by years of touch. Windows that have seen many seasons. This house has welcomed people for a long time. Doors open, lights on, table cleared again and again. There was a time when the door never rested. Someone knocking, someone arriving, someone leaning in the frame, needing warmth. And you let them in, because that is what houses do. They shelter. But a house that never closes its door loses its heat. The rooms grow cold, even with the lights on. The structure weakens, not from storms, but from overuse. So one evening, without ceremony, you close the door. Not in anger, not in fear. You close it to keep the warmth inside. Inside, the light settles. It does not glare. It rests on the floor, the walls, the small ordinary things that make the place yours. A chair, a cup, the quiet hum of being undisturbed. This is not rejection, it is preservation. When you keep your distance now, it is not because you care less. It is because you care more honestly. You no longer rush out into the night to prove your goodness. You tend the fire that allows goodness to exist at all. Silence becomes a kind of listening. You hear your own footsteps again. You notice how much space there actually is when you stop filling it. The house breathes. So do you. From here, love looks different. It does not reach and grab. It stands steady, visible through the window, saying without words, "This is where I am." Those who belong will feel it. Those who don't will move on, and neither requires explanation. The harmony returns not because everyone is close, but because everything is in its right place. The door, the light, the space between. You stand at the threshold sometimes, hand on the frame, feeling both inside and outside, connected but not entangled, open but not exposed. The house is quiet now, not empty, held. And the truth that settles gently into you is this: distance, when chosen with care, is another way love stays whole. Now it comes to rest, not with fireworks, not with a final insight you can hold up and admire, but with a loosening, a quiet exhale you didn't know you were still holding. You can feel the long road behind you, the years of carrying, the explaining, the softening, the staying a little longer than your body wanted to stay. You see it clearly now, without bitterness. It was heavy, and you carried it because you thought you had to. But something has finished its work. You are no longer arguing with the past. You are no longer rehearsing your reasons. You are no longer trying to make your peace legible to others. You notice how simple the moment is when you stop defending it. Peace, you discover, does not need witnesses. It does not need approval. It does not even need to be understood. Explanation was a kind of captivity. Each word a small tether back to rooms you had already left. Each justification an invitation for someone else to decide whether your life made sense. And now those tethers fall away. You don't feel triumphant. You feel light. Not empty in the old way, the hollow way, but empty like a bowl set down after a long meal. Nothing missing, nothing waiting. The body settles first. The jaw softens. The breath finds its own rhythm. Your hands rest without clenching. You are no longer measuring your goodness by how much you give away. You are no longer counting yourself through other people's needs. You are simply here. There is a deep kindness in this, finally turned inward. Not indulgent, not dramatic, just steady. You understand now that walking away was never abandonment. It was alignment. That silence was never coldness. It was clarity without force. You didn't become less loving. You became less divided. The world goes on, as it always has. People continue to ask. Some will misunderstand your quiet. Some will miss the version of you that was always available. You let that be. You have learned something older than guilt, something calmer than explanation, that your presence is not owed, that your peace is not a negotiation, that a life does not have to be justified to be lived. You sit with this understanding, and it does not demand anything more from you. No next step, no final improvement, just this: a clean space inside, a door that opens when it should and stays closed when it must, a self no longer scattered across other people's expectations. You are not withdrawing from life. You are standing in it, whole. And the truth you leave with is simple enough to carry without effort. Peace needs no explanation.